Hello again! Today will be a continuation of the RTS Hidden Gem timeline. A lot of these RTS that we are going through you may or may not have heard of, and this is likely because the developers simply did not have the capabilities of marketing as vast as the big name games. But that has not and will not stop us from playing and enjoying every minute of them. Today I want to show you some more that I think have secretly gone under the radar and have attributed some noteworthy RTS aspects. To start us off, we have an RTS that has branched off the usual resource gathering, base building, and enemy destroying ideologies. Seven Kingdoms Ancient Adversaries, released in 1997, was developed by a Hong Kong-based small company called Inlight Software. Not too much to talk about their arsenal of games that were available, as it was scarce and they were not successful at all. But we will not bash them for trying, as this was a small developing team, and as we have learned from the fate of most video game developers, bankruptcy or being bought out are usually the only two options they have. It was published by Interactive Magic, who was also known for publishing lowly budgeted video games in the 90s to early 2000s. Despite these shortcomings of finance and fame, Seven Kingdoms has pulled its weight for the RTS picture to compete with other RTS during this time. And this was right around the beginning of the golden age for the RTS, which I've created a video on if that suits your interest, by the way. Anywho, the idea of incorporating elements from other games was still unusual for the RTS, and it was mostly seen during the modern era. I also have a video on that too. Okay, I'll stop with the upselling. Within Seven Kingdoms, we are going to see some borrowed aspects from the city building genre. But before we delve into that, let's quickly summarize the story and a little bit of the gameplay. In this RTS, you are to choose from 7 kingdoms of different races throughout history: Japanese, Chinese, Norman, Viking, Greek, Persian, Mayan, to fight or befriend each other in order for your kingdom to thrive. There are many methods to achieve victory through domination, economy, and even persuasion. The single player does not have a campaign scenario, but it does have a map generator which will allow you to alter and fiddle with the match conditions, difficulty level of AI, beginning resource amounts, and other usual customizations found on a map editor. There is not much of a story, and while these Empire kingdoms are historical, it's not at all accurate, as a lot of them were formed or peaked in a different time period or had little or no interaction with each other. The most obvious borrowed aspect has to be the kingdom reputation, sometimes referred to in other games as the population happiness meter that we see in the city building genre. As you the king, there are certain situations where the population will disapprove of what is happening, and it is in your hands to decide whether you shall grant their wishes or take the path that is most necessary for the future of the kingdom. Fighting and putting your kingdom into war will decrease your reputation within your kingdom, as in reality, wars cause a loss of lives and people are not simply willing to put their lives at risk so easily. Other situations that can drop your reputation are as follows: attacking other kingdoms without first declaring war, terminating any of the 3 treaties, alliance, friendly, and trade, attacking civilians of either independent villages or other kingdoms, when your civilians are attacked and killed, and many other situations that have small infractions. Lower reputation level causes the loyalty of your civilians to drop easily, and if low enough, controlled villages may rebel. This lone aspect allows for you, the commander, to not solely rely on combat, which has been the RTS's main point of emphasis, but to also take the needs of your people into consideration. There are also other methods of increasing reputation, main one being the surplus of food and gold. So long as your civilians are fed and being paid, loyalty level will remain high, causing you to be a reputable king. Another method of increasing your reputation is by attacking the Frightens and their lairs. With each kill, the reputation will slightly increase as the kingdom is protected from the savage, monstrous beasts that lurk beside your villages. These Frightens are neutral, and it can be decided on the editor before the match to have them defensive only, attacking when provoked, or on the offensive, where they will raid towns. Do not think that with all these lone RTS aspects present, that the original ones we see on most RTS are absent in Seven Kingdoms. Resource gathering is harvested in a unique manner at a constant rate, similarly to Total Annihilation discussed on our Golden Age RTS. The raw materials are a type of metal that can have a mine built over it, and it is to be collected. The material is then shipped to the factory to become a processed good, which finally it is sold at the marketplace. You will need workers from the connected villages to gather and process these goods, but there is no back and forth collection like that of Warcraft and Command & Conquer. The marketplace is important for trade with surrounding kingdoms who may have different processed goods. By trading, you can obtain these different goods into your markets, and it will improve the quality of life for your villagers as they have a variety of products to purchase. A higher quality of life for your villages means a faster growing population. There are a lot of different variables that affect your kingdom, and it is not simplified to being concerned solely on invasions. I have only grazed the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Seven Kingdoms and its variables, just so you are aware. I really insist on giving this game a try if you are into the RTS City Builder hybrid. Hidden gems, as we mentioned, have mainly been underlooked because of their financial budget, but another factor that has burdened their success might also have been their similarities to previously successful games. It is that instant prejudice that can have us not even attempt to fully play a game. Crush, Kill and Destroy, also known as kknd, was released in 1997, and it was developed by an Australian video game developer, Beam Software, who actually had a couple of successful video games in the 1980s. The Hobbit, a text-adventure PC game, though it seems boring and primitive now, has sold over 1 million copies, and The Way of Exploding Fists, one of the earliest well-accomplished fighting games, were some of Beam's early creations. kknd has often been unfairly subjected as a Command & Conquer clone, because of the similar post-apocalyptic setting where two factions, the human survivors and the resilient mutants, face off in an ongoing war. But it isn't just the story that was convicted of mimicry. The gameplay was also a victim of what I think is a misjudgment by gamers as a clone. Let's begin with some of the aspects that have been inspired by Command & Conquer, and later I can show you some mechanics that were improved upon and the difference that kknd incorporated. The construction of the base and its surrounding buildings are familiar to Command & Conquer, in that there's a limit in distance where they can be built from the command center. They are built automatically without the need of a unit whenever you choose to. Unit recruitments are centralized to a building for the infantry, and another for the vehicles. One last influential aspect that is quite prevalent is the visual and art style familiarity, specifically from the Survivor race. It is very noticeable when you have them side by side. Now moving on to some improvements from the two Command & Conquer games prior to the release of kknd. Firstly, the infantry overall are much more practical for use. They inflict more damage, and most importantly, they are much more durable from the Command & Conquer games. I just found that infantry weakness for the Command & Conquer was one of my main knocks on the game, and especially for their price made it difficult to rely on them. Though the instant killing of the infantry by having heavy vehicles run them over is still present, and I still feel as a player lean towards recruiting more vehicles instead to avoid this outcome. Early RTS was all about the faction uniqueness through units, buildings, sprites, and playstyle, and while it is noticeable in the first two Command & Conquer games, kknd seems to have taken it further. Each faction has entirely different sprites and matching tier units, and are almost all unique in their style of attack and usage. Putting the Scorpion and Flame ATV, who are both equal tiers, side by side, we can see that one is more of a long-range splash damage unit, while the latter has a close-range, high-damage output. And this is only one of many examples of different attack styles among the matching tiers. Now to touch on a gameplay difference it has implemented not seen in Command & Conquer. The special units, also called the 21st Century units, can be discovered throughout the map and are more powerful but cannot be recruited, revived, or even repaired. Same idea as the heroes from Warcraft 2 Beyond the Dark Portal. kknd does have some flaws that we should address. Big one in my opinion is the enemy AI. It is one thing to have an AI that is intelligent and knows when to retreat to lure you to more units and to attack from different fronts, but it seems that the AI has an unfair advantage of automatic recruitment all the time, even when they are in the middle of launching an attack. As a human player, usually when you are micromanaging, such as when you launch attacks, the overall macro management is affected. That being, the recruitment process is slowed as you must divert your attention elsewhere. The other advantage I do believe they possess initially is the location of your base, and are able to launch early attacks while you're starting up your base. kknd may not have been groundbreaking to the RTS industry like that of Command & Conquer, but it is certainly no cheap clone, and if you enjoyed playing Command & Conquer, you will equally enjoy kknd that possesses aspiring and improved gameplay RTS qualities. The RTS has borrowed aspects from other video game genres, but it is also good to note that there are closely related ones that oftentimes get mistaken for being an RTS. The real-time tactics genre being one of those, which we already discussed on the first part of this timeline, by explaining how the game Z was more of an RTT rather than an RTS. One of the 5 principles of an RTS is omitted in an RTT, that being the resource gathering. The next game that we will discuss falls in the RTT category, and it is often misclassified as an RTS. Myth: The Fallen Lords was published and developed by Bungie, who was in its early stages before becoming the well-known team who developed the first 3 installments of Halo, and more recently the Destiny series. In Myth, we can see that on top of omitting the resource gathering, the economic responsibility is also nowhere to be found, and this in part has to do with the fact that campaign scenarios provide only a fixed number of troops with no possibility of recruiting. Now this is nothing new that we have not already seen with certain campaign scenarios like in early RTS such as Warcraft 1 and 2. These scenarios were very difficult as you got further into the campaigns, because on top of having a limited number of troops, the enemy was able to recruit from their fully functional base, or in the case of Myth, possess a ridiculously large amount of troops that outnumber your fixed army vastly. Just imagine the overall difficulty of Myth, because every mission has this circumstance. The scenarios did have an overall mission. A few examples of the mission objectives include defend a village of a non-controllable people, reach a specific area on the map, and kill a boss-like unit. Other few aspects to note being the 3D camera views, which can practically be rotated in every direction. You are capable of zooming in for better detail and out for a bird's eye view. Although the field of view was limited and cut off once the troops were near the map boundaries. Overall, Myth is heavily simplified for the player, with gameplay as we mentioned earlier because of being an RTT. But another reason is the limited variety of troops. The Archer, Warrior, Berserk, Journeyman, and Dwarven Demolitionist each have their own specific roles of close combat, long range, and splash damage. And this simplicity is not a knock on the game at all. In fact, players would enjoy just having to focus on the military tactics of micromanagement rather than constantly switching their focus in between that and base building and resource gathering of macromanagement. In every game there has to be some cons. With Myth, I thought there was a lot of unique RTS aspects, but I do think there are some hindrances to discuss. The friendly fire, in my opinion, is overly susceptible to killing your troops in the attack. The explosives that are launched by the dwarves have a large damage radius and can easily kill troops of the enemy, but regrettably your own as well. Again, this is not anything new, as the catapults from Warcraft and grenadiers from Command & Conquer were prone to commit friendly fire also. But as mentioned, to a higher degree and radius of damage which can obliterate your fixed number of units, especially the melee ones who were mostly the victims of this. But this wasn't what irked me the most about the friendly fire. It was the fact that launched arrows from your archers may unintentionally hit your own troops if they are in the way of the line of fire. And if this did not frustrate you enough, it was hard to picture how you were going to complete the mission, as the field of view can only be moved so far from your units. With most missions requiring you to travel across a map, you could not plan ahead what path you will take. And because of this ambiguity, you may have to reattempt the mission several times to figure out how to avoid losing your units before realizing where you should send them to. I find both of these cons and the fact that your troops are a fixed amount while outrageously numbered greatly raises the difficulty level of the game overall. Speaking on the troops, their movement was slow and it was frustrating, especially when you had missions that needed your units to traverse to the opposite side of the map. Well, can't you increase the game speed? Well, yes, but by doing that, you are also decreasing the enemy AI's reaction time, further making an already difficult game harder. My last disappointment about this game is the lack of music during gameplay. Soothing music can be heard during the briefing, and it kinda reminded me of Halo. And of course it did, as the same composers were used for the Myth original soundtrack. But why would you not add some of that beautifully composed music during gameplay? It sounds eerily quiet, and I get annoyed hearing this guy's voice all the time.
Casualty.
A year later, because of Myth Fallen Lord's success critically and even financially, selling over 40,000 copies in its first year, a sequel was created, Myth 2 Soulblighter. It generally has the same gameplay as it's the same game engine used. The graphics were improved and it looked smoother. It was especially noticeable when you zoomed in on the units, as now the detail is more visible. The overall sounds have improved, coming from the explosions to the ambient sounds from the animals that give you a realistic feel, though there is still no background music while playing, disappointingly. The animated cutscenes have also improved in visuals and do not have you questioning what is taking place like the ones shown in the first Myth. They have continued the very intricate, well-admired story, and now you are dealing with another fallen lord named Soulblighter, who is the cause of all these new invasions. Another improvement has to be the pathfinding. The units you select to move to the area will not wander endlessly due to not being able to reach the command point. Myth 2 Soulblighter kept the basic gameplay attributes, but added in improvements that were gladly welcomed by the RTT and RTS fans. And these new additions were not radical enough to change an already fun game to play. And we will give it a pause here with these 4 RTS hidden gems. Were any of these RTS your hidden gems? Are there any other RTS games you feel get called a clone of another successful RTS? Are you more into RTT or RTS? What do you think of the RTS borrowing other genre elements? This series is ongoing and it does not have a definitive end date. As always, thank you for supporting, and please CLS, comment, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. It is really appreciated. Have an awesome day.